Hi everybody, it's Anne with Art on the Creek. Welcome back to our series of beginner watercolor lessons. I hope you feel like you've learned a little bit and you're having a great time painting all these paintings every Wednesday. We've got a series of 15 in all, and I do have a playlist of these. Today, let's add on a Luna moth. Are you ready? Let's get to it. Hello, we're all set and ready to go. We've got our supplies laid out in front of us. And what I wanted to share with you is, if you're using these same supplies that I've recommended, the Paul Rubens watercolor block, the cold press block, we stick our little palette knife or some kind of edge that's not sharp through there and then run it around to separate these from the block. But some of you may have noticed about halfway through, there is a magazine texture, kind of cardstock, shiny cardstock painting that is adhered on there in between. And I don't know why they put that at the halfway point, but all you have to do is take it right off and then you'll just be at the next paper. So don't let that throw you. So we're all set. We've got our Winsor Newton Cotman watercolors, and we have our Princeton snap brush set, pencil, a kneaded eraser, paper towel, and a jar of clean water. Now, what we're going to paint today is a Luna moth. I found a really great photo of one on Pixabay. And I think what I'd like to do for this one is to turn it in a vertical orientation or a portrait orientation. So what we're going to do, instead of having him going straight up and down on the vertical axis, I'm going to rotate my paper just a little bit to the right as I'm drawing him. And I'm going to have the axis go at that angle from top left to bottom right a little, not completely on the diagonal, but somewhat. So I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see the drawing process here. It's very simple. I'm just starting with a little dome for his head. And then we'll go around and paint that little, or draw the little collar around. He's kind of got like a little scarf around his neck there. And then let's see, he's got these great antennae that are really unique to this moth, I think. I'm not real big on all my insects, so I might be wrong, but I love how on Luna moths you can really see these antennae and they look like little feathers. I'm just going to mark the center line though, because I don't want to draw them in completely. And now just holding my pencil a little bit further back so I've got a nice fluid ability to make a curve. I'm going to draw the curve of the wings. Now you notice the curve on the left wing goes down a little bit sharper than the curve on the right wing, so I do want to catch that. And then for the underside of the wings, they're so sheer, they really overlap. Let's get his body in first so that we can have some reference though. So we'll get just kind of the basic shape of his body. It kind of looks like a little shield there. It comes down to a little point. And we can't see his all the parts of his body in total, so we're just going to kind of make that little shape. Now over here where I'm drawing the upper wing on our right side, I've done the same procedure where I'm holding the pencil toward the back and I've got my wrist resting on the table so that I can move my wrist up and down and have a real natural, graceful curve. And I'll zoom in on this section here in just a moment because you can see that the line is really just a suggestion. It's kind of a curved, wavy, dotted line, if you will. And that will help me to decide when I'm painting how I really want those curves to go. So you can see I've just kind of repeated that process, and now I'm just finalizing the details of his little tail there. It's not really a tail, it's just kind of the lower portion of his wings, but it kind of looks a little bit like the tail of a kite or something like that. I'm going to fix that curve over there because it almost looked to me like it was shying away from the edge of the paper, so I wanted to extend it out just a little bit. And then let's see, he has these eyes on his wings. He has one on each wing section. So let's get those drawn in. And I did decide to go ahead and clean off my palette for this one because his colors are very clean and very light. And I wanted to make sure that my mixes weren't contaminated with anything else already on my palette. That's optional. You do what you want to do with your moth. I am using Viridian and the cadmium yellow hue to mix here. And I want to get it really, really thin. The more water that we add to our mixes, the more transparent they will be. And since our moth is transparent pretty much through and through, I wanted to go ahead and have this mix just as sheer and see-through as I possibly could. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the wing sections one by one here. and then let's catch up when we get a little further along. The key with this part of the moth is to really have enough paint mixed up. And you'll see I added some water to his body there, and now I'm going in and lifting off even more. I'm rinsing out my brush, and I'll roll it on the paper towel to blot off the excess, and I'm just going to kind of firmly wipe along the body to pick up as much of that green as I can, because I want that to be very, very sheer. So now I'll go ahead and finish painting. I'm avoiding the eyes, but I'm filling in the entire moth, except for the eyes and the antenna, with this first layer of green. So let's go ahead and finish that. And I'm going to skip ahead a bit. If this goes too fast for you, you can always pause the video and get caught up. So once you have your moth completely painted with green, just go ahead and give it a dry with a heat tool or let it dry naturally. Now that that's dry, what we can do is we can assess for value. I've decided that my moth is a little too limey green right now. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing in a warm blue, that ultramarine, and I'm going to just tone him down a little bit. This will kind of provide a veil or a shadow over the entire moth, and it will just add a touch of warm blue to it that will help our eyes to see it as a green that's not quite as bright and vivid. So let me do that. We're going to go over all of them with an ultramarine. If you are happy with the way that your moth turned out in that first pass, you don't need to do this portion. So I'll skip ahead to the end of this and then catch up with you again. Now you can see I've worked on those sections on the right now toward the end here, so you can see that wing section on the left has already had a lot of time to dry, so it's already done its color shift and it is lighter. I'm using the number 6 round, by the way. So we'll just finish this up and hit it with a heat tool again, and then we'll move on to our next step. I'm going to go to a new section on my palette here, and I've made a new puddle of ultramarine, and I'm mixing in some alizarin crimson. I want to get a nice rich purple, but I want it to pull toward red. So I will continue to mix this. I'll add more pigment in until I think I have enough for what I'm going to do on the moth here, because there's a few spots of purple, not a lot, but there are a few. And what I'd like to do first is start with his wing over here. I'm still using my number 6 round. Very carefully, very light pressure on the paper, I'm going in on the edge, and then as I curve up and get closer to his head, I will pull that line of paint away from the edge because I don't want it to touch the edge completely just yet. And I'll do the same along this little collar around his neck here. So we're getting in a pretty thick layer of pigment right here. This will be the darkest portion. And now I'm getting my brush wet, blotting it off on the towel, and using that damp brush to just disturb the pigment a little bit to encourage that paint to run upward toward the moth's head. But it won't be, the color will kind of create a graduated effect when you do this, when you disturb the pigment along one edge. We've done this before to create shadows, and it's a great technique. It's something that you'll do in just about every painting that you create. So now we're doing that same technique with a wet brush along the top of the wing, because what I want to do is bring that purple up to the top. So here you can see I'm painting that dark pigment again, staying away from the edge of the wing until it starts to bend down, and then I can go ahead and thin out my line and make it coincide with the edge of that wing there. And once I have all that purple pigment laid down, now I can get my brush wet, tap it off on the paper towel, and again just agitate the upper side of that pigment line to encourage that paint to flow to the top. It creates just a nice variegated rounded shape for you. For our next step, I'd like to go in and start working on the shadows on the wings. I'm mixing some ultramarine with a touch of our lamp black because we don't have a Payne's gray. If you do have Payne's gray, that's the color I would recommend using now. Going very lightly with it. And we're just creating some kind of random little folds. I am referring to our reference photo a little bit just to see about where those folds lie, but I'm not following it exactly. We're just trying to do an illustration of a lunar moth here, so we don't need to focus on photorealism. We are just suggesting that these wings have bends and curves in them, and we're picking up this shading throughout. Now on this edge here, I'm kind of focusing on the portion where the wings separate. We're going to do some highlight at the end with a white colored pencil, but for now, we're going to leave that shadow in. Whenever you're painting flowers or leaves that have curvatures in them, any kind of curve, what you're going to do is to carefully pay attention to where those shadows lie. And by following that curve right there, we can establish the little twist in this wing. So you see how things just kind of pop out and appear once you add the shadows. It's really kind of nice. This wing on this side has a little more separation, so I want to make the shadow a little wider, and you'll see that's accomplished by just pressing slightly more heavily on your brush. Not using a real thick wash of pigment here, just keeping it very thin and just gently putting in those shadow lines. But we'll keep that one a little bit wider, and when we're done, that will help that upper right wing to elevate a little bit from from the lower wing of our moth. All right, our first pass of wing shadows are complete, and now I'm reactivating that green on my palette and kind of mixing in some of that ultramarine and black that I have, because I want just a slightly bit of darker green. I don't need a lot of it, so just that little bit on the palette will be just fine. And I'm just going to add a little bit of darkness around the edges of the moth's body. That will help establish just a slight bit of curvature. I also painted his head with that same green, and I've zoomed out here, but you'll see I'm still using that blue and black mix, and I'm kind of putting those darker marks along the body of our moth. The next step you're going to want to do, which isn't shown on the video here, is to go into your purple again and do one more coat over your the purple lines on the wings and around the neck, if you feel it needs it. I did, but yours may not. And now I'm taking the yellow cadmium hue and just filling in those eye marks. So let's get into our Lunar Black here. And now we're going to just kind of punch up this black spots on his body. The first layer that I went in, the first pass, was kind of a gray because it was mixed with that ultramarine. And now I'm going in and kind of defining those, not going in all the same spaces, but going in some of those spaces with the Lunar Black. And you'll see this technique, what I'm doing, I'm tapping this Lunar Black just like that, just kind of like you're doing some little dots with a pen. And just tapping it all along the edge of the moth just to try and establish a little bit of really dark value of furriness. He does have quite a bit of texture on this purple. And you want to be sure and hold the hold the paintbrush up and down so that you can make very small dots. Still using the number 6. If you'd rather use your number 4 at this point, you sure can, but either one should work. You just want to use the very point of the brush. And now let's kind of add his eye in here, just somewhat of a shape, leaving a little bit of space there for a suggestion of a highlight. And then I decided not to put on the other eye because we can't see it in the photo. Once the eyes on the wings are completely dry, you can go in with that same purple mix, and it just looks like it's got an eyebrow, which I'll paint on there. I'm just doing all the little eyebrows first. That's what I'm going to call them anyway. And then it's kind of just a line in the middle that looks a little bit like a pupil, just boom, just like that. So that's all I'm doing for the eyes on our lunar moth. And again, that's just with the purple that we used on the wings and around his neck. We've arrived at that portion in the painting where I like to assess the values and make sure that everything is dark enough or light enough. I'm going in with the ultramarine and a little bit of that lamp black, and I am punching up some of these shadows. You see, I've already gone under the wing and along the right side of the body, and now I'm adding a little bit of shading and detail to the very tip of that wing there down at the bottom. For the antenna, I think it's time to switch to our number 4 round, and I'm just going in with our burnt sienna, just plain burnt sienna, pretty thick mix because I don't want this too watery. Again, we're going to use a very light pressure, and I'm just making little lines as if you're drawing a leaf or a feather, just remembering to taper it off as we get to the top. Now, if you need to draw this in, you sure can, but I just decided to go ahead and freehand it here. You can also just do this with a colored pencil. You wouldn't have to do it with your paintbrush if you felt like this was too much detail for you. Absolutely, just go ahead and use that colored pencil. I would just choose a brown shade. If you have a burnt sienna pencil, go ahead and use that one. But if you don't, just very lightly go in with a brown. And remember, whenever you're using colored pencil, that one you can't really take up, so just make sure less is more. Use a very sharp pencil and just go in lightly. And then if you like where you've put your lines, then you can darken them up a little bit if you feel they need it. Now our poor moth is just floating in space, so let's go ahead and give him some shadow. I've dipped once again into that deepest shadow value that I've mixed up of ultramarine and a little bit of the lamp black. And I'm running a bead of pigment along the edge there. It's not too much. And I'm back to using my number 6 round, by the way. And now I'm agitating that edge of the pigment with the water just so that it can flow down. And I will pick up my my painting book, the watercolor book. Sorry, I couldn't think of the words there. I'll pick that up and give it an angle here in just a bit. So what you want to do is have most of the pigment up against the wing of the moth. I am, in my imagination, the light is coming from the top. So I wanted to kind of focus the shadows on the bottom half of whatever would be casting a shadow that way. And now I'm just dropping in more pigment into that wet wash that I've added. And here you go. See, I'm picking that up so that you can see this pigment run down. And right there, as the part that I just put down, you can really see it run. But even some of the longer streams, you can really see them move so slowly across the paper. And I like to let them have a chance to do that naturally. Yeah, I can manipulate them later as time goes on, but I do like to let the chance to have them drip around naturally, because I think that gives the painting just a lot more finesse. It makes it more interesting to look at if you let those pigments run naturally on your paper. On the lower half of the moth, I've pretty much pulled that water all the way to the edge of the paper. And now I've gone to using our 3/4 stroke brush, and I've wet the top, trying to clean up what I've got on the palette and just kind of put it in there randomly to create kind of a soft, just a soft background. I guess that's all I want to go for. And I'm picking up the purple to put that in there. Purple and green are wonderful contrast colors, and that's what I wanted to set this moth on a bed of purples and blues so that he would really kind of jump off the page. And I think we achieved that toward the end. Now I'm making sure with that 3/4 inch flat stroke brush that I've got all of this blended and merged exactly the way that I wanted. I didn't want any hard lines that would be in the wrong place. And I really love how that alizarin crimson is separating out from the ultramarine blue there up on the top. I love it when you get these colors with the pigments that are different weights and they can separate out. And that's another reason I like this new Winsor Newton Cotman set for students, is that you will get some of those great performances out of your watercolors. The one thing that you do sacrifice if you're not using a professional set and you decide to opt for this Cotman set is pigment strength. However, I think it just really does such a great job to teach you how to mix your pigments, how much pigment to use, and it gets you to really focus on value and how you can manipulate that by painting instead of simply mixing the right color. So I really do like this set. I hope you guys are enjoying your set. Now I'm just finessing all of that paint around, making sure that I've got everything where I want it. And let's go ahead and give it another shot with the heat tool and make sure it's completely dry before we come back in with our white colored pencil. Most colored pencil sets come with a white. I happen to be using a Derwent Graphitint white pencil. It makes no difference. The best white colored pencil that I have found to use for really opaque white colored pencil is Prismacolor. If you have a Crayola set or a Rose Art or some kind of student grade set, that's fine. Just try and use your white colored pencil, because what it will do is by laying it on the side like this, we're going to just sketch in a little bit of that fogginess that kind of is all over these moth wings. They are sheer, but they're not crystal clear. They kind of have a bit of a fogginess to them. And I think that going over this in some key spots with a white colored pencil will help to take away some of that luminescence and give it just that fuzzy look that we're looking for. Now he's all done. And before I zoom out here, you can see we've already taken him off the block and he's ready to go. I hope you can see that I also added that white color pencil along the purple that goes on the edges of his wings and around his neck. I really had fun painting with you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this one. And if you'll stick around, we'll do lesson number 8 next week. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you next time on Art on the Creek.